Hello, and welcome to the Aquarium of the Pacific. We're going to get our program started tonight. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Jenny, and I get to MC this evening. I am the Aquarium's Vice President of Education and Conservation. Today, we are here because you are here, but also because of some of our generous donors, who you can see on the screen. So we have sponsorship of the First Wednesday Lecture Series from Stephen and Brenda Olson, the Osborn and Roork Charitable Trusts, and Courtyard by Marriott Long Beach Hotel. Let's give a round of applause for those great sponsors that allow us to offer this program to you. Those of you that are familiar already know that we have an in-audience, in-theater presence, but we also have an online presence. So there are many, many people on YouTube right now watching us. And you have the opportunity to share this lecture and former lectures or future lectures with your friends and family, also on the Aquarium's YouTube channel. So keep that in mind. This is always hosted on the first Wednesday of the month, so we will be coming back next month, but I'll introduce that speaker at the very end. Today, we are talking about newts, California newts. And it's not a movie star life for these newts, and you'll learn more about why. Our presenter tonight is a longtime friend and contributor to the Aquarium. Dr. Lee Katz has been a longstanding member of the Aquarium's Scientific Advisory Group, the Marine Conservation Research Institute. He also is a professor at Pepperdine University, and is currently serving as the interim dean of Seaver College, which is the undergraduate liberal arts college at Pepperdine. He does amazing research on amphibians, including the California newt, and he's been doing that since 1999. He does research really well embedded with students, so he's bringing up this next generation of amphibian expert, and that includes traveling to locations where these amphibians exist outside of California, like Costa Rica and Argentina. He got his training at Calvin College in Michigan and a PhD in animal ecology from the University of Kentucky. And he's got many publications. So if you love his live remarks, maybe check out some of those awesome scientific publications that you could find on Google Scholar or other outlets. He will present for the first half of our time here, and then he'll ask for questions. So keep your questions lodged in the back of your mind, and we'll have some volunteers running up and down the aisles after his remarks to take those questions. Because we are a respectful audience, we're all going to turn off our cell phones and turn them to silent or vibrate so that we can have the full experience. And I welcome you to join me in a round of applause for Dr. Katz.
Well, thank you, Jenny, for that introduction. And I'm super excited to talk to you tonight about what I think, and I hope you're going to agree by the end, one of the most charismatic animals in our state of California, the California newt. And this is the first time I ever heard the newt get a round of applause, so I think many of you are already on board for the charisma characteristic, okay? So let's just get a couple things straight about newts right off the bat. I've been studying these for over 30 years, so you can imagine every question under the sun that I've received about newts. First of all, people get salamanders and lizards confused. So let's start there for a second, right? So much like all toads are frogs, all newts are salamanders. So let's settle that right now. So when I talk about a newt, it is a specific kind of salamander. Now, obviously, if you're a naturalist of any type, you've been outside, you quickly tell the difference if you encounter a salamander outside versus a lizard, right? I have good colleagues, well-meaning colleagues that come up to me and say, hey, Dr. Katz, I went hiking this weekend. I saw a newt. And I'm like, whoa, that's cool. How do you know you saw a newt? Well, it ran across the trail and went up a tree. You all know what a newt is. Because the minute that, I won't name the academic discipline who's reporting this, says it ran up a tree, I'm like, I'm going to let you down gently. I don't think that was a newt, all right? So you may know that the newt is one of the most toxic animals in the world. Yeah, our old California newt that lives in our backyard. Super toxic. We're going to talk about that more tonight. That also means it's super slow. If you've watched a newt crawl across a trail or walk across some dead leaves. It just plods with pure arrogance. It knows nothing is going to bother it. This strategy of being super toxic has worked for thousands and thousands of years. And it is one of the most arrogant animals around because it knows it is so toxic. I always tell my students, if you're ever on that Survivor show, do not eat slow animals. You'll want to capture fast animals, right? And so think about that for your survival skills, okay? All right, well, we start with maybe the only sculpture, at least a 15-foot sculpture of a newt that I've ever seen. You got to fall in love with city government that says, yes, we're going to commit to putting a large California newt. And this is in one of our newer parks in the city of Malibu. I love that sculpture. I want to start with just a little bit of California history, by the way. And so we're going to start with this book written by a scientist, Victor Chandler Twitty. Victor Chandler Twitty, here is the author. In 1967, wrote this book called Of Scientists and Salamanders. If you're a naturalist, try to find a copy of this. It's super well written, super interesting. Victor Chandler Twitty was a very, very well-known embryologist. A lot of embryologists work on amphibians. Victor worked on salamanders. But then he took a job at Stanford in the 1950s. Throughout much of the 1950s, he was the chair of the Stanford Biology Department. And guess what? He too fell in love with newts. And I'm going to read an excerpt from this book, very short, but listen to this. I think you'll find this interesting. In addition to being a delightful place to live, California offers an asset that is perhaps less well known to the millions who have been flocking there in recent years. In my somewhat prejudiced opinion, its newts are unrivaled anywhere in the world. So you have a new talking point the next time you're at lunch or talking to relatives. We have great weather in California. We have great wineries in California, and you would not believe our newts. So please keep the tradition of Victor Chandler Twitty alive as we talk about newts. Oh, thank you. Yeah, we have water in California. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the life cycle, the natural history of this animal. Southern California, we have some of the most beautiful perennial flowing year-round. That's key for a newt. Needs to have a perennial stream here in California. Again, many people will say to me, hey, I've got a stream flowing through my property or on this park. Maybe it's got newts in it. And I'll say, is it flowing year-round? If it doesn't flow year-round, it's likely not good habitat for a California newt. They need that water pretty much flowing year-round, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. But you must admit, our streams in Southern California, some of the prettiest streams probably in the entire country. Well, I started this a long, long time ago. I was a whole lot skinnier, and I had a whole lot more hair. But as Jenny mentioned, I've always done it with my students. I still do field work like this. We're out every year. We've got over 30 years of data on California newts, and we're going to talk about some of that tonight. I like to highlight this student right here. This is Dr. Seth Gamrat. He became a very, very well-known orthopedic surgeon. He's a sports orthopedic surgeon. He's often on Fox Sports commenting on professional athletes, and yet I like to remind Seth that his papers on newts are still more popular than his papers on orthopedic surgery. So this is a little bit of an awkward way to introduce the newt, to have them in this in coupled form right away, but for over 90% of the year, most of us aren't seeing newts because they are underground doing things that we still don't really understand. So they're fossorial, meaning they're underground for about 90% of the year. When the spring rains come, if you're in newt habitat here in Southern California, go out on a warm spring day when the rains are happening in maybe as early as February, March. You'll see the newts begin to emerge from underground and do that slow walk down the hill toward one of those beautiful streams. When they reach the stream, that's where breeding occurs. Okay? That's why we have so few amphibians in general in Southern California, because that whole word, amphibian, dual life, amphibio, dual life, water, land. As we all know, we don't have a lot of fresh water for great amphibian habitat in Southern California. So our biodiversity for amphibians is already starting relatively low just by the nature of the climate and the system that we live in. Some of you may have heard Dr. Robert Fisher and Aaron from the Aquarium talk about our local frogs last month. Robert Fisher has been a longtime colleague on this work as well for over 20 years. And you'll note that when we go through these drought periods that we've recently been battling our way out of, those are additionally hard on our Southern California amphibians. And so we don't see them, they're underground, we need rain for them to emerge, and it needs to be, pretty good climate for them to emerge, go into the stream, and that's where breeding occurs. So breeding and the larval stage occurs in the water, just like frogs. For our local frogs, need to be in the water to breed. So here's a picture. I'm always going to tell you if this is underwater because it gets confusing. This is underwater. This is two males already trying to grapple for one female that they've found underwater. Now it starts to get even more complicated. If you know a little bit about newts, you may hear that sometimes you'll come upon a newt ball, a ball of newts, right? And because they are so toxic, they're oblivious to your observations. I mean, if you've encountered this in the field, count yourself really, really fortunate. Because A, you don't get to see it very often, and B, unlike most of our wild animals, they're not going to suddenly stop what they're doing and flee. They'll just continue what they're doing, all right? And so this is a situation here, again, underwater. This is the female, usually a little bit lighter in color. Here's her somewhat maybe perturbed look right here. And this is one male attempting to court her, another male here, another male here, another male here, and this is what we call a newt ball, right? Because they are so oblivious to you, you can actually, I don't recommend it, but I mean, they actually can be picked up, they can be examined, you can put them back down, and they're just fine. They continue saying, who's going to win this wonderful female newt, right? Now, what's going on here is very, very interesting. The female is making a really hard decision here. She's in total control of this. Doesn't look like it right here, but she's in total control of this because she will ultimately select the one male that she's going to share her eggs with, okay? And so that process begins often with 8 or 9 or even more males all trying to be attractive to that female. Now, I got to stop here for just a second because our newts are so cool. When they're underground and on land, they have one morphology. And when it becomes breeding season, they're like, hey, we got to get ready for the water. It's time to jazz up a little bit here, get a bigger tail because I'm going to need something to help me swim. I got to have more surface area because I have to exchange oxygen underwater. I don't want to have to go to the surface and leave that female behind. So I'm going to get a really big tail so that I can get gas exchange through that tail. And so these are the kinds of morphological changes that have to occur for these, particularly the males, before they get in the water. So you'll notice that these males have very dark skin, they have really long tails, and that tail serves not only to help them swim faster, but it is an organ of gas exchange for them as well, just because it's got a lot of blood flow through it, a lot of capillaries, and it's breathing in a way through that. Don't newts just have beautiful eyes? Look at that. It's just a beautiful eye there. Now, when breeding season is over, the skin totally changes. The tail begins to shrink. It gets smaller. You don't want to drag around a big tail on land. This is things you got to think about, right? And so this is how evolution has equipped these organisms to live both on land and in the water in this fascinating cycle that they go through every year. All right, so just a quick picture here. The hardest part about this picture was training them all to line up perfectly like this. I can tell you exactly how we did this later, but these are all from the same stream, right? So if you are, again, a naturalist, you're out in the field, you say, hey, look, I just saw a reddish salamander. I think it was a newt. Oh, really? Well, hey, we've walked 10 more feet, and I just saw one that looks kind of black. Is that still a newt? And look, one has smooth skin, but wait, one has really bumpy skin. And this is the same population here in Southern California. Pretty cool, right? And I'll just tell you what's going on here. This is a male in breeding condition. Look at that tail, right? That's a male in breeding condition. This is a young female. This is an older female that's got particularly dark pigments. This is not normal. And this is a particularly warty female. And that's been noted for 30 or 40 years, that some individuals get slightly bigger warts, and we have no idea why. Interesting, huh? All right, so now that female has made her choice, she's whittled it down, 7 or 8 males. We're down to 1, and here's your next interesting question for your discussion. Unlike frogs that have external fertilization, this is our PG-rated portion of the evening, salamanders have internal fertilization. Here is the kicker. Males do not have any kind of penis or copulatory organ, and so that's something you need to talk about at lunch tomorrow. That salamanders have internal fertilization, but the male has no reproductive structure. So what's going on there? Okay, I'm going to jazz this story up a little bit, but it kind of happens this way. Kind of, right? She's finally decided, this could go on for hours, by the way. You know, this probably started with 8 of them around here yesterday. She's now gone to this one. And this part I don't make any of this up, but I'm not elaborating on this part right here. Here's how complex this is now. You ready? The male is got special calluses on his fingers right now. He is stroking the bottom of her abdomen the entire time right now, saying, I know you've picked me, but this is just to be sure. I'm still the one for you. He has special teeth-like structures that are only in the spring under his chin here. They're like sandpaper. If you ever find a male newt in its breeding condition and you rub a lot of things to think about. You rub your finger under their chin, it's like sandpaper. He is rubbing that sandpaper, trying to get some of his pheromones, his sexy newt male odors into her bloodstream by scratching her on the top of her head. Little did you know this was all going on with newts, right? This is all going on. And then, this is the toughest part. He's got to then decide to leave her, walk off of her, the front of her, go to, this is all happening underwater, the bottom of the stream, take a certain number of steps in front of her, and then deposit a package of sperm on the bottom of the stream. He then hopes she takes the exact right number of steps forward and stops right over top of his package of sperm so that she can pick it up with her specialized organ in the back called a cloaca. Are you kidding me? All in flowing water? And now, in some salamanders, this is hard to believe. In some salamanders, if the males are not successful and they haven't been the one chosen, they hang out and watch. And when that male puts his package of sperm down, they run in there and they put their package on top. And another one may run in and put his package on top of that one. And in some species of salamanders, the sperm packets may pile up 4 or 5 high because she's only going to pick up the top one. Who knew? So he has to have her walk the correct number of steps forward. And look, there it is. She has just picked up the package of sperm with the specialized cloaca here, and the sperm will now be internalized. She's been carrying those eggs around. They've been developing, at least getting ready for the springtime, and internal fertilization will occur. So now you have the lunchtime answer for how internal fertilization occurs without a male having a reproductive structure. All right, then the males have nothing else to do with the process other than be a negative influence later potentially. That's a whole other story. There is a lot of cannibalism in California newts. My group began documenting it in the early 90s. A lot of cannibalism, and a lot of the males become cannibalistic. But in this case, the females then, fertilization has now occurred, and like an artist, she has to sculpt these egg masses, and that's what she's doing right here with her back legs. She is releasing eggs in a very thin gelatin, and that gelatin begins to take on water, and each of the white dots is a fertilized embryo. And so she glues this egg mass to the branch, all underwater. So here she is, with her front legs, making sure this one is, firmly glued, and she's already started laying the next one back here, and her back legs will attach that one. Is this incredible or what? And so here you see, this is likely from another female that has laid these eggs all underwater. Okay? Now, this is, just like there were newt balls where the breeding situation got a little bit chaotic, breeding too gets chaotic as well. Here you begin to see many, many egg masses. These are not all from one female, multiple females. And when I see males in situations like this, the males have no business being in there anymore. If I see males in an area where there are a lot of egg masses, it's likely he's becoming cannibalistic and he will begin eating the eggs. And we're working on a paper right now seeing if the males can differentiate whose eggs he's eating or not. Evolution should say that a male should not be eating, obviously, eggs of his own. And if he's going to be eating eggs, he should be eating eggs of someone else's. So these are females that are still completing the egg-laying process. And here's a little further distant picture, but you see all these egg masses here, multiple females still working. Now, this is why, I always tell my students, this is why conservation is very difficult, right? Because often the egg masses are laid communally, all together. Why? Is it that one female chose that one stick, and then all the other females said, she said it was a good stick. I'm going to lay my eggs there too. So is it just copycat that causes 40 or 50 egg masses to all be in one area? Or is there something about that exact microhabitat that is perfect for egg laying? How, and by the way, we deal with this with every species. I can't ask an organism why they are doing what they're doing, where they're doing it. It's up to me, right, to say, oh, well, I find newts here, so this must be good habitat. But they only lay their eggs in certain places. And I still can't figure out after 30 years why you'll find 40 or 50 egg masses on one tree limb, one underwater root, and they don't distribute them. Why not 2 here? Why doesn't the next female lay hers somewhere else? Why isn't the next female? I have theories, but we don't know. And if we are going to begin conserving and preserving newt habitat, those are the kinds of questions we're going to need to begin to solve. So here's a close-up of a newt egg mass. You see that embryos are beginning to take on shape. Each egg mass has about 30 embryos in it. So 30 embryos, all going to hatch into little tiny newts. Now, we don't call the tadpole stage of a newt a tadpole. We call it a larva. So a newt larva, this is a newt larva, right? This looks like a space alien, right? This is, before axolotls became popular, there were newt larvae, right? This looks like a tiny, tiny miniature axolotl in a way, right? These are the external gills. The external gills. This animal is about 1 inch long, 1 inch. This is the front leg with some development. The back leg is just a nub. Every black dot is a pigment cell that will begin to grow and divide and ultimately turn orange. But really, really well-developed eyes. That's a cool question. Tadpoles don't come out of the eggs with really well-developed eyes. And yet newt larvae hatch with really well-developed eyes. Again, you're out there thinking, why? What's the difference? What's the difference? And if I could see you, I'd ask you to raise your hand. But tadpoles are grazers. They're going to smell algae. And when they smell good algae, they'll find it, they'll begin scraping it, right? Baby newts at 1 inch are voracious predators. And so they have to be born with great eyes because they're already hunting the day they're hatched from the egg. Isn't that cool? Why have such well-developed, big, giant eyes when you're 1 inch long? Because this is a hunter. This thing is hunting the day it hatches from the egg mass. And it'll be eating all the things we want it to eat, like mosquito larvae. This is one of the best mosquito larva predators out there, but we never talk about it, and we don't relate newts to practical matters like human disease. And there is a very good connection for those kinds of connections. Well, this is an observation that my students and I made many years ago. Here are some streams that we began surveying many, many years ago, and we began just doing simple correlations. We're like, wait a minute, there are crayfish in some of these streams, present, 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 absent, absent, absent. There are mosquito fish, non-native fish, non-native crayfish, absent, 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 present, present, present. Where are we finding California newts? Because in the 1970s, I knew the guy that collected the data in the 1970s, they were present in all the streams. So you all can see the correlation and where we're headed here. It's not a movie star life because some really bad things came in the last 50 years that began just hammering newts, being really, really hard on newts. And some of you are sitting there right now going, wait a minute, you had us convinced this is one of the most toxic animals in the world. It's so well defended, it's worked for thousands and thousands of years. And now you're ruined the story because you said these animals came in invasive animals like crayfish and mosquito fish, and they're somehow wiping out the newts. I have a disconnect. Well, I'm not giving you the answer right away. The reason these were perplexing because some years the newts were absent, some years they were present. And now, in retrospect, I know what was going on there. They were only able to be present if crayfish numbers were really low or mosquito fish numbers were really low. If mosquito fish, an invasive fish, and crayfish, an invasive crayfish, were there that year, the newts said, I can't be here. And you'll see why here in just a minute. Why are the mosquito fish invasive? Well, we brought them in from the southern United States to help us control mosquitoes. Really? Well, I just told you we had some really good natural mosquito predators, like newt larvae. So we brought in mosquito fish. They're a type of guppy. They're native to the U.S., but they're not native to California. And then we began handing them out for people to control mosquitoes. Not a good ecological practice. Crayfish, we have no native crayfish in Southern California. If you're on a hike and you see crayfish, it's an invasive crayfish. They've been sold as fishing bait in the state of California for 50 years. And because I'm proud of this, because Pepperdine students, for a long, long time, we collected a lot of data saying wherever there were invasive crayfish, our native frogs and our native newts were disappearing. Many, many bait stores, particularly in the San Fernando Valley and others, they stopped selling crayfish because they began to see our stories about crayfish being really, really bad on our native amphibians. Here's one of our non-native crayfish. This is called the red swamp crayfish. If you ever eat crawdads in Louisiana, that you're eating this species. It is the species most eaten in the Mississippi drainage area. It's a great species where it belongs, but if you see a crayfish in Southern California, it's probably this species, the red swamp crayfish. Why did they do so well? They're super aggressive, right? This crayfish, when it sees you, it says, oh, it puts its claws up. It says, I think if I get it just right, I could take that person. I think there's a possibility, yes. That's the mentality of this crayfish. It's perfect for an invader because it's super aggressive and it has all the attributes of an invader. Here's one underwater, and you see where it's making a beeline for. These are newt embryos. This is a newt egg mass covered in sediments. Newt egg mass, you see a newt here about to hatch. This crayfish says, oh, stationary candy. I will eat every single one of those. Now, again, this toxin works for natural predators, and it doesn't seem to deter this crayfish from the Mississippi River much. The egg masses also have toxins. The female puts toxins into her eggs when she lays them to defend them. We have recently published a paper that says that these crayfish make a trade-off. They're like, yeah, this is good protein. There's good carbohydrates here. There's good things for me to eat. But you know what? They have a cost. It is a neurotoxin. It actually slows the crayfish down, and it makes them kind of sluggish. It doesn't deter them, though, from eating the darn egg masses. And so our crayfish are gradually wiping out some of our populations of newts. Here's the newt larvae, 2 more that have just recently hatched. Crayfish, boom, eat them like that. And the mosquito fish as well. One of the early studies my students did was we went and collected mosquito fish, those tiny little fish, in some of our local streams. We sacrificed them to see what was in their stomachs. Guess what? They weren't eating mosquito larvae. They were eating newt larvae and frog tadpoles. They're predators. And so that was a mistake. Well, this is what happens when a crayfish is with a newt. Here's that beautiful male newt tail. Here's one chunk taken, second chunk, third chunk, fourth chunk, fifth chunk, sixth chunk, probably 7, 8, 9 attacks by a crayfish. Just ripping pieces off of the newt. And we showed early on that, again, talk about a trade-off. Do you stay in the water and try to lay your eggs, try to find a female to breed? Or do you say, hey, I got to give up breeding this year, otherwise I'm going to die from these crayfish attacks. I'm going to go back onto land. And they choose to go back onto land, and they'll forego breeding for that year, right? So you'll see more of this here in just a little bit. This is a female. This is a female that has eggs, beautiful newt, and look at the attacks on her tail. These are all crayfish attacks, trying to get pieces of protein for that crayfish to feed for that crayfish to feed on. So these are some of the stories, some of the patterns that we've tried to put together. And by the way, it's not all a bad story. You have to understand who's causing these troubles to know how to fix the problem. And so part of what we do now is we work with trying to find safe areas. Can we create safe zones? Can we remove crayfish from parts of the stream? We're doing the same with one of the most endangered frogs in South America. One of my colleagues here, Dr. Gary Bucciarelli from UC Davis, is here. And that's exactly what we're doing in Argentina, where an invasive trout is wiping out one of the most critically endangered frogs. And our colleagues, and my colleague and I, and the Argentina colleagues, they're creating safe zones. They're building dams that stop the trout from going upstream and trying to find safe areas. We can do the same here for newts and our local frogs. I'm going to go real fast. We already talked about the mosquito fish, other invasive predators like bullfrogs, but it is an ecosystem story, right? Here is our only aquatic snake in Southern California, the two-striped garter snake, right? What's its favorite food? Here it is eating local tadpole, one of our tree frogs. The same, it would love to eat a newt larva as well. And so if our frogs disappear, if our newts disappear, our only aquatic garter snake will disappear. We've got to have those safe streams for our frogs and our newts. If not whole streams, let's figure out a way to trap part of the stream, to trap those crayfish, remove those mosquito fish. These are too dark really to tell. Interesting story. This is a beautiful riparian snake here in Southern California, the ringneck snake. And we one time wandered upon one. This is what they do when they're afraid. They flash this color. Has it worked? I haven't seen any of you look a bit frightened. They flash this beautiful color, and it's supposed to say, oh, I'm toxic, you go away. I guess it works. But we came upon one, it's hard to see this, but this is a ringneck snake. It's half eaten a newt. Now keep in mind, the ringneck snake is a native predator. The snake was totally paralyzed, just laying flat on the rock, couldn't move a muscle. I'll promise you it won't do it again, right? So it works for the native predators. It doesn't work with these invasive predators. And of course, a wildfire is part of the story as well. I'm just going to click through this. This is, unfortunately, we're starting to see a huge amount of this again in the state right now. But I just want to show you a couple pictures of what happens to the habitat. And newts have to deal with this as well. This, unfortunately, is a rattlesnake. You know, we hear the stories about wildfires natural. Well, the speed of our wildfires is probably not natural. The frequency is probably not natural. And this rattlesnake couldn't get underground fast enough. This is a newt. This newt couldn't get in the water fast enough, right? And this is what the habitat looks like. Here you see, keep your eye on this rock formation, this beautiful pool where the newts breed. And again, what happens to that pool after wildfire? There's no pool. And we have the data there that says the newts will forego breeding. They come back to the exact same pool every year. And we know that because 25 years ago, we began putting in little tiny pit tags into the newts, like some of your dogs and cats have, these tags. These aren't trackers, but they tell us when we find the newt where it was last time. And we can find a newt 10 years later. Yeah, they live a long time. Some of these newts have been carrying my tags for 25 years. We think a newt lives 40 or 50 or more years. A tree frog will live 2 or 3. A newt will live 40 or 50. And this pit tag will tell you that exactly this newt, where I last saw it, what its body condition was, if it was healthy or not. I want to jump way to the end, and you're not going to miss much of a story here because it's more of a story about invasive species. I do want to say, I'm sorry, I do want to back up just 1 second. This is the last sad thing I'll say. But after the Woolsey fire, we began seeing a lot of diseased newts. These are emaciated, way underweight newts. These are cysts on newt's chin. This is a newt cataract in the eye. Tail is beginning to rot away. Very emaciated newt. Good news is we're working with some of the best pathologists and disease scientists in the country trying to figure out what was it about a wildfire that maybe triggered this kind of disease in newts after the wildfire. I'm going to jump to the very end because we're about out of time, and probably the greatest editorial the LA Times has ever written. And there's not a lot of politics we can share these days, but I think you'll share with me this editorial. This was a real editorial in the LA Times in 1997. It's tough to say newt with a straight face or even look at one of the tiny amphibians without cracking a smile. But the predicament facing the tannish-brown salamander native to California's coastal and Sierra ranges is nothing to laugh at. Locally shade-eating wildfire and a thinning ozone layer are wiping out the newt's fragile eggs in the Santa Monica Mountains. And if that weren't enough, mosquito fish handed out by Los Angeles County vector control officials find newt larvae a tasty treat. The benefits of mosquito fish are obvious. They gobble up the larvae of the mosquitoes and keep Southern California livable for humans, but their use raises inevitable questions about how much tinkering we humans ought to be doing with the natural order, highlighting the difficulties and uncertainties involved in bumping off a pesky species without disturbing the lives of countless others. It's easy to write off small drab creatures as disposable casualties in mankind's pursuit of better living, but maybe it's also a little arrogant. Who really knows which threads are safe to snap and which ones hold life's complicated web together? And I just want to say that like this newt, the newts and the frogs are holding on. They are holding on. And there's a whole lot that we can do to help them hold on. I hope you agree. Newts are super charismatic animals. Thank you. The story that I went through quickly was more about how invasive species, most of us know how they get out there, and I've already told you what we need to do to try to help work on that problem. But happy to take any questions. Might have to turn that on. There we go.
Hi. How well do the eggs live in a laboratory setting, and are you able to raise any in the lab for re-release?
That's a great question. In fact, Dr. Bucciarelli and I were here earlier today talking to Aaron, the person who's most looking at some of the amphibian recovery projects here at the aquarium. And this is the irony, right? Newts are a species of special concern in the state of California, but have no formal protection yet. So sometimes we wait too long, right? We wait till they're endangered. We wait till they have that gravity of protection before we're like, oh, we need to start raising them in captivity and jump-starting them. We haven't done that yet. But just as I said, we need to be ahead of the curve here, because newts are a species of special concern, and they're probably soon to be moved toward near threatened or already near threatened, and we ought to be thinking like you're thinking right there. The egg masses do great in captivity. They do great. They'll hatch in captivity. Those little cool larvae will hatch out. You can feed them in captivity. They'll grow just fine. So we know that much. Yeah.
Could you pass this down? Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
Earlier you were talking about the morphology
Yeah.
of the newts. I had a question relating to the toxicity. Is hold it up. Sorry, sorry about that. I was wondering, are you seeing the levels of toxins in the newts, morphology increase as they're experiencing new predators?
Such a great question, and I'm going to call out my colleague again, Dr. Gary Bucciarelli. He did his whole doctoral work on that exact question, because there is in the literature this idea that the toxins are relatively fixed. That you go to Northern California, they have this kind of toxin. Southern California, they have this kind of toxin. And Dr. Bucciarelli has been able to show that truthfully the toxins fluctuate all over the place, and stress can cause toxins to fluctuate, and development, what stage they are in development, can cause it to fluctuate. And you need to invite him back sometime to talk about the toxin story, because we're just fully beginning to understand that toxin is coming from a symbiotic suite of bacteria living on the newt. The newt doesn't produce it itself. It's a suite, a whole bunch, a kind of an ecosystem of bacteria that are producing. And so how does the newt regulate what those bacteria are doing? There's 2 more PhD theses in the works that should be worked on those kinds of questions. So I love that. That's a great question.
Thank you.
Hi. Quick question to follow up that one. I see you hold them. Is that something that's they're that toxic to humans, or is that more to other predators that maybe put them in their mouth or something?
Right.
And that's
right.
not my main
So,
question, just to say.
Yeah, I set a bad example there. Your skin is a very good barrier to the neurotoxin, but if you have a cut in your hand, you have a blister in your hand, you could be vulnerable to the neurotoxin. And so my students and I have begun using protective gloves more and more, certainly than I used to 25 years ago. It's I don't recommend anybody pick them up. It's just not wise. It's not good. You don't want to stress out the animal by handling it at all anyway. But most people aren't going to have a negative effect by touching a newt. Now, if your dog puts one in its mouth, that's a whole nother deal. The dog will have a pretty negative reaction.
And my main question was, with crawfish, is this something where you suggest, if you see one in the wild, to take it out, whether to eat it or whatever, because it is invasive and hurts creatures?
Is anybody here? Oh, this is recorded. You can talk about that after, but you need a fishing license. If you have a fishing license, that's my answer. If you have a fishing license, the way I understand it, you can take as many as you want. And my recommendation would be, take as many as you want.
Hello. I had a question about a specific salamander that we found in our yard one year. It's been 10 or 15 years now, but it was after a really heavy rain.
Yeah.
And there was just this little bitty thing.
Yep.
It was the smallest. I thought it was sick. It was scrawny or whatever, but
Yeah.
it looked like it was maybe a slender
Yeah.
salamander.
Yeah, it was
But
a slender.
I'd never seen, we don't have any bodies of water in our yard. We live in Westminster, and I'm like, did it
Yeah.
get washed down from the mountains, or where did he even come from?
No, I oversimplified that part. But so that's a whole different family of salamanders. We have a few of those here. And they're in this family called plethodontid salamanders. Very cool set of animals, by the way, terrestrial. They're fully terrestrial salamanders. You ready for this? And they have no lungs. So they're fully terrestrial salamanders, vertebrates, just like you and me, vertebrates, but they have no lungs. And you'll notice it has a huge worm-like tail back to gas exchange organ. So it's actually just breathing through its skin. But they don't need water to lay their eggs. They just need dampness and moisture. So great observation. They're actually much more common probably than we think, but they're just totally underground. Yeah. You all have seen some cool stuff, asking great questions. You guys can be in my class anytime. Yeah. Oh, somebody over there. Do we have time for another one? Or where are we?
I'm getting the
There
thumbs
you-
up,
there
yes.
you go. Okay,
Um,
good.
I don't want to humanize these newts or
Sure.
grant them too much cognition.
Sure.
But you say they forego breeding for that season.
Yeah.
What are the processes that confirm whether or not a newt is ready to go?
Yeah, exactly. So basically, when I say things like that, they're making decisions, right? They're making decisions, but that decision is not as complex as we think about it. They go to a pool that has worked for this individual for maybe, I told you they lived 30 or 40 years, and it's not there. And so it then goes through its kind of evolutionary options. You know what? For years and thousands of years, it's worked in my lineage to come to the same pool. The pool has no water in it this year. I'm just going back in it. And because evolution has so equipped our animals, they're not going to waste that energy that they were about to put into eggs. They might as well just walk back into the hills and say, I'm going to reabsorb those eggs. Again, I'm making it sound like they're thinking, but this is how evolution works, right? Because the way I tell my students, if you made the bad decision, you didn't leave any ancestors, right? They're gone. So these animals have historically made really good decisions, but we're dealing with such changing systems now. The speed of wildfire, the frequency of wildfire, the severity of wildfire. That pool now, because of how much sedimentation we got, it may not come back for 10 or 20 years or more. So, that's the kind of decisions they're making.
Oh, it's my turn? Okay. Hi, great lecture, by the way. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
So when you mention amphibian, and you're talking about how there's an exchange of gas on their tail, I mean,
Yeah.
Do they have gills, or is that?
Yeah.
I'm a little bit confused when on land, how do they breathe versus in the water, how do they breathe?
Yeah, great question, because I skipped over some of that. When they're larvae, they have gills. When they go through metamorphosis, usually at the end of one summer, the gills reabsorb and their lungs become fully developed. So they are a lunged salamander. That 90% of the time they're underground, they're breathing with lungs. When you see them walking on land, they're breathing with lungs. But when they go into water, that's the beauty of being an amphibian. They have very breathable skin. That's why their skin is so sensitive. They have a lot of it's capillary rich, gas exchange capable. So when they go into water, the males, again, this is an evolutionary adaptation, they don't want to have to use their lungs if they don't have to, because it means leaving that chaos of chasing that female. So then they have this really long tail that adds to the surface area where there can be gas exchange with the water. So that tail, air is just coming out of the water, going into their bloodstream, because it's such a big surface area of a tail. So they still use their lungs. They will still surface occasionally. You'll see them do a quick gulp of air, but then they don't want to do that because they've lost their great spot with that female. Good question. You all were listening. I love it. Do we have time for one more, or are we finished? Oh, way down in the front. Two in the front.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I had two quick questions. The first one is I've been reading about birds eating plastics and then that creating pathology, birth defects, and everything. So thinking about the wildfires, could melted plastics like trash and everything, debris, and then how that changes with the wildfire be consumed by newts or just be in the environment?
Great question. That is actually one of our theories about one population in particular where we saw a lot of mortality and a lot of disease after wildfire. It was also one of the few locations where there were burned facilities and buildings in the watershed. So one of our theories actually were there toxins, plastics, something that happened in the wildfire, in the burning of those materials that caused that? We don't have the answer to that yet. I'm not sure we will, but I like the way you're thinking.
Well, yeah, I'm glad that it's being researched. And then my other one was just curiosity. If they're living underground 90% of the time and go to water just once a year for breeding, why is their habitat limited to streams that are year-round?
Yeah,
Could
because
that
of
be
the
expanded?
yeah because of the larval stage. The larval stage usually goes all through summer, and so most of our ephemeral, our flood-sensitive streams, by June or July on a typical summer, they've already begun to dry up, and the larvae would all have 100% mortality. So they need that year-round because they don't go through that full transition sometimes until October or November. And so there's only a couple months where at least one stage isn't in the water. Very good question. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I don't know where we're allowed to go. Oh, great here.
You mentioned in the beginning that they spend most of their lives underground.
Yeah.
But I'm a little bit confused that, is that time spent asleep in some sort of torpor, or do they burrow, or what's going on under there?
Yeah, what's going on under there? I know. Our technology on tracking animals isn't quite good enough yet on an animal that small, on an animal that would need to have, a radio transmitter attached to it that would take it underground without deterring it from crawling underground. And so we don't have the answers to that yet. But no, it's not just a sedentary state where they're sleeping. They're definitely feeding, they're eating. By the way, newts, they're so cool. I was telling Aaron earlier today that, I've looked at newt diets for, 20 some years, and to see what they're eating, you can, without disturbing the newt too much, you can see what they've been eating. And the coolest thing that ever came out of a newt's stomach, now keep in mind, most of you have seen newts. The coolest thing that ever came out of a newt's stomach was a baby bird. Yeah, right? So they eat about everything. And this one said, ooh, baby bird. I think I can get that down. So yeah, they're underground eating. They're having a cool ecology. We just don't know about it yet. So many things we don't know. All right. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry to cut the questions short, but Dr. Katz will be available for additional questions if you have them at the reception that follows this lecture. You have the opportunity during that reception to not only talk to Dr. Katz, who I would argue is a wonderful speaker. I want him on my moth panel in the future where you do those live performances of stories. That was excellent delivery. Let's give him another round of applause.
Good. Good.
So in addition to asking questions of Dr. Katz, or perhaps our unintentional celebrity guest, Aaron Lundy, who is the manager of conservation initiatives here at the Aquarium of the Pacific and also an amphibian lover, you have the opportunity to see some of these amphibians. Hooray! So we have part of our frogs exhibit open for you tonight. This is one that just got remodeled in May, so you're among the first sets of people to look at it. We also have our crafts and cocktails, which is a standard offering here of our first Wednesday series. So it's a choose your own adventure as you immediately exit tonight. If you go up, you get to see amphibians first. If you go down, you get to have cocktails and crafts and a special guest of Axel. Does anybody know who Axel is? Yeah, we have a set of puppets here, the Pacific Pals at the Aquarium of the Pacific, and one of them is an amphibian. Axel is here tonight, and you might have the opportunity to meet him when you exit on the ground floor. So thank you again so much for being here. Our next lecture will be on August 7th. One of my good friends, Shannon Cosentino-Rausch, will be coming and talking about the future of seafood in sort of a sci-fi way, because she does cellular aquaculture. Mind blown. What does that mean? Yes, they are growing salmon fillets and bluefin tuna fillets in a lab. And to know more, you have to come back in August. Thank you all for being here tonight, and enjoy the rest of your evening.